Welcome to the Deep Dive. This is where we take a whole stack of information, news analyses, think tank reports, even comments from online discussions.
Right, a real mix of sources.
Exactly, and we try to distill it down into the insights you really need. Today we're plunging into, well, a really complex topic that hits global security, diplomacy. The landscape of Russia-Ukraine peace negotiations.
Yeah, it's an incredibly intricate web, and our goal today is really to unpack the role, often a huge role, that international players and external pressures have on these talks.
How they set conditions, maybe offer incentives.
Or impose penalties, right, and how the whole strategic picture keeps changing for both Kyiv and Moscow because of these outside forces.
Okay, let's get into it. We'll look at who's involved, what they're actually asking for, and maybe why, after all these efforts, real lasting peace still seems so far off. Some of the dynamics might surprise you.
When we talk about this external influence, it's almost like think of international actors as conductors. Ukraine and Russia are the soloists, definitely. But these other players, they're setting the tempo, providing the score, sometimes even handing over the instruments.
We've definitely seen different mediation attempts. Early on, remember, they met in Belarus, then Istanbul.
Right, the initial stages.
And that led to some limited things, like humanitarian corridors, prisoner swaps, and notably, Turkey and the UN managed to broker that deal to get Ukrainian grain moving again from the Black Sea ports.
That was significant, yeah. A big deal for global food security, even if it turned out to be temporary. It showed something practical could be agreed upon, at least.
But it was limited.
Very limited. And beyond those early attempts, you also have Ukraine pushing its own diplomatic track. President Zelensky put forward that 10-point peace plan.
Which has been discussed in these big international meetings, right? US, EU, India, Brazil, South Africa, Saudi Arabia, Malta, Switzerland too, I think.
Correct. A lot of countries involved in discussing Ukraine's plan. But what's really striking and kind of highlights the disconnect is that Russia hasn't been invited to those specific talks.
Yeah. So one side is talking, but not with the other side in that forum.
Exactly. Which brings us to the role of major powers like the United States.
Right. This is where it gets really interesting, especially with the U.S. approach kind of shifting, maybe.
Yeah.
Particularly talk around former President Trump. What's going on there?
Well, yeah, that marks a potential big shift. The Trump administration, or talk about a future one, is often described as aiming for a grand bargain.
Meaning like one big deal covering everything, not small steps.
Exactly. Tying lots of complex issues together. And crucially, the sources describe Trump using both sticks and carrots.
Okay, what are the sticks and carrots in this case?
Well, the sticks are pretty hefty threats, like imposing 100% tariffs and maybe even secondary sanctions on Russian oil.
Secondary sanctions meaning hitting other countries that still buy Russian oil?
Precisely. Widening the economic pressure, that's the stick. The carrot, or perhaps just the other side of the pressure, is a promise to ramp up arms shipments to Ukraine.
So pressure Moscow, support Kyiv, aiming to force a deal within, what, like a 50-day time frame was mentioned?
That time frame was reported, yeah. It's a dual strategy, squeeze Russia economically while strengthening Ukraine militarily, hoping that forces Moscow to the table seriously.
And how does that kind of harsh rhetoric, which sources say the world's kind of gotten used to from Trump, how does that play out? How do Moscow and Kyiv see it? And how does it fit with the ongoing U.S. aid?
It's complicated. The U.S. has obviously provided huge amounts of financial and military aid. Some analysts argue that more aid is key, making the cost of invasion so high for Russia that peace becomes the only option.
Makes sense.
But the Kremlin, according to these sources, sees the sanctions and the weapons deliveries very differently. They see it as a signal for Ukraine to just walk away from any peace process.
So diametrically opposed views on what the aid even signifies.
Absolutely. And this really gets to the core question, what does an achievable peace actually look like? You had U.S. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth reportedly saying that getting back to pre-2014 borders is maybe an unrealistic objective.
Although he did walk that back a bit, saying everything is on the table.
He did clarify this, but it raises the question of what compromises might eventually be considered. And then there's this other angle, the U.S. signing a mineral resources deal with Ukraine.
Right. I saw that. Some see that as a way for the U.S. to maybe recoup some aid costs down the line and also just build a stronger partnership. Practical, maybe a bit transactional.
Could be seen that way. It adds another layer to the U.S. involvement.
And it's not just the U.S., is it? European countries like France, the UK, they're pushing too. Talk of an unconditional ceasefire, even security guarantees.
Yeah, potentially involving tens of thousands of European troops as peacekeepers. Maybe 30,000 was floated.
But that feels like it would need American backing.
Right.
And the U.S. keeps pushing European nations to spend more on their own defense anyway.
Almost certainly would need U.S. support, logistical or otherwise. Which brings us right back to the fundamental roadblock. Russia and Ukraine want completely different things.
This is the core of it, isn't it?
It really is. The sources really hammer this home. For Russia, peace seems to mean achieving their biggest war aims. Putin, the Kremlin says, is ready to talk peace only if Russia gets its main goals.
And what are those main goals? How are people interpreting that?
Well, many observers read that as basically demanding Ukraine's surrender, capitulation.
Wow.
Russia insists on keeping all the territory they've annexed Crimea, plus the 4 regions they claimed in 2022. They also want foreign aid to Ukraine stopped and the Ukrainian army drastically cut down.
Which would leave Ukraine.
Essentially, yeah. Partitioned, isolated, disarmed, and really defenseless. That's the interpretation of those demands.
Okay, so that's one side's definition of peace.
Yeah.
It makes the trust deficit seem almost unbridgeable.
Absolutely painful. Every offer, every pause is viewed with such suspicion. Many just don't believe Putin actually wants peace right now.
They see his talk of ceasefires as just excuses.
Exactly. A ploy, some sources call it time-dragging bullshit. Basically just to buy time, maybe regroup, or hope. Western support for Ukraine fades. He's reportedly quite confident Russia can win in the long run, that he can outlast the West.
That confidence, if true, would definitely reduce any incentive to compromise.
Hugely. Why compromise if you think you'll eventually get everything you want?
And then, on Ukraine's side, their demands seem just as firm, but coming from the opposite direction.
Completely opposite. Rooted in sovereignty. They demand the return of all territory Russia has seized. That includes Crimea, all the annexed regions, full restoration.
Plus reparations. Accountability.
Yes. Reparations for the immense damage and loss of life, the return of children who were allegedly kidnapped, and accountability for war crimes. And Zelensky's been crystal clear. Ukraine won't accept any deal made over their heads without their direct involvement.
So, connecting back to that bigger picture, it really is like your analogy of the chefs. One wants a spicy curry, needs those ingredients. The other wants a sweet dessert. Totally different list.
They're at the same table, supposedly discussing a meal, but their fundamental vision of what that meal is, it's just incompatible right now. It makes mediation incredibly difficult.
And we're seeing this impasse play out constantly, even this week. President Zelensky announced his National Security Secretary, Umerov, proposed a new meeting with Russia.
Yeah, to try and speed up talks, maybe get a ceasefire. Zelensky repeated he's ready for a leaders' meeting.
But then, the same day,
Kremlin spokesman Peskov says, yes, Putin's ready for talks, but it's but only based on achieving those main goals. And he adds, it'll be a long and difficult process.
And meanwhile, the fighting continues. Russia hitting Odessa with drones, Moscow getting hit by drones. On the very day they're talking about talks again.
It just underscores the deep mistrust and the reality on the ground. Diplomacy is happening or being talked about alongside active, intense conflict.
So, with things so hostile right now, how do analysts even think about the long-term prospects for these talks? Is there any way to model this?
There are attempts. We found this interesting framework from the CSIS Futures Lab Center for Strategic and International Studies, part of their Strategic Headwinds series.
Yep.
They use something called a peace agreement simulator. It basically models different potential deal components, things like territory, security guarantees, neutrality, reparations.
And sees how different combinations affect the key players.
Exactly. It tries to calculate satisfaction levels for Ukraine, Russia, the U.S., Europe. The idea is to find combinations that keep everyone above a minimum threshold, a point where they wouldn't just walk away from the table entirely.
Trying to find that maybe narrow zone of possible agreement.
Yeah, it's a pragmatic approach, almost like engineering, trying to find a structurally sound pathway where core interests are met just enough to keep talks going, even if nobody gets everything they want.
So wrapping this all up, what does this complex picture mean for you listening? We've seen the path to peace isn't just two sides talking. It's more like this high-stakes, multi-dimensional chess game.
Right, with powerful external players constantly influencing the board, with fundamentally clashing ideas of what peace even looks like, and this enormous mountain of mistrust.
We've touched on the outside influences, the different definitions of peace, the ongoing challenges. The future really seems to hang on whether these external conductors can find some harmony.
Or if the main soloists, Russia and Ukraine, find any room to compromise. Or maybe if that sheer pressure, the sticks and carrots, actually forces one side to fundamentally change its goals.
Which leads to the final thought. Given this web of demands, leverage, shifting alliances, what kind of peace is even possible when one side defines it as total victory, the other as full restoration? What does it actually take for either side to truly believe that not negotiating is worse than continuing the fight? And what unseen costs might any potential deal hold for everyone else?